The dining room at my parents' house in Denver was set with meticulous precision. Every fork, knife, and spoon was perfectly aligned, exactly 2 centimeters from the edge of the polished oak table. Crystal wine glasses shimmered under the chandelier's warm light, each catching a small rainbow on the ceiling. Plates were arranged with mathematical exactness, and folded napkins sat squarely on each charger. The air carried the faint scent of roasted turkey and fresh pine from the wreath on the mantel, adding an oddly formal weight to the room. Emily sat to the right of Dad, radiating elegance. Her cashmere blazer and silk scarf whispered luxury, and the subtle shimmer of her watch caught the light as she moved her hands to adjust the papers in front of her. I noticed her lipstick, perfectly applied, the sharp contrast of deep red against her fair skin. She was poised, confident, as though she owned the entire space and everyone in it. I arrived straight from my shift at the warehouse, the polyester name tag shirt still clinging to me with the warmth of the truck loading dock. I felt out of place immediately, the scent of industrial cleaner lingering on my sleeves. My hands were slightly stiff from handling boxes all night, and I could feel the rough edges of my shirt under my collar. Emily stood and began her presentation. A laptop screen showed the Family Wealth Assessment Matrix Q4, a chart ranking each family member according to projected annual economic impact. She spoke clearly, explaining how she calculated net worth, investments, and projected business growth. The slides moved smoothly, each transition precise, reflecting the countless hours she had clearly spent preparing for this moment. She referenced each step methodically, highlighting the family's financial standings and the subtle rankings that placed me firmly at the bottom. Reactions from the family were immediate. Uncle Frank leaned back with a slow nod, muttering a quiet, "Interesting." Cousin Ethan tapped his fingers lightly on the table, barely concealing a grin, while Cousin Olivia whispered a compliment under her breath. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, eyes wide with both pride and mild apprehension, unsure how to balance support and gentle skepticism. I remained seated, a quiet observer. I didn't raise my glass or join in the collective murmurs of approval. I watched Emily move seamlessly through her charts, noticing the confidence in her voice, the precise gestures, the way she seemed to command attention without effort. The contrast between us was clear. She was part of this world of controlled elegance and high stakes. I was on the outside, watching, quietly aware that no matter how much she praised our family's achievements, I would always be in the margins, a silent witness to the ceremony of success. The room hummed with polite commentary and carefully measured laughter. Emily glanced at me once, a brief flicker of acknowledgement, then continued explaining her slide, breaking down how each family member's assets and projected growth contributed to the overall annual economic impact. I nodded faintly, silently appreciating the complexity of her work while keeping my distance. The formal energy of the dinner wrapped tightly around the room, leaving me in my warehouse uniform solitude, observing a world that was technically mine by blood but practically distant in every other way. The next morning, the dining room in our Denver home was quiet, the sunlight filtering through the curtains onto the meticulously arranged table. Every utensil was aligned with mathematical precision, crystal glasses reflecting the chandelier overhead. Emily, seated to Dad's right, radiated elegance. Her tailored blazer caught the light, her watch glinting as she adjusted her hair. I had just returned from the warehouse shift, still in my polyester uniform with my name stitched above the pocket, feeling slightly out of place among the polished setting. Emily clicked the remote, bringing up the Family Wealth Assessment Matrix Q4 on the large screen at the end of the table. She gestured toward it with a laser pointer, moving through each slide deliberately. "We will rank contributions by annual economic impact," she announced, her voice controlled, professional. "Frank, starting with you, $2,500,000. Uncle Frank leaned back, a satisfied smile crossing his face, raising his glass slightly. "Impressive," Mom commented softly, nodding in approval. Ethan, my cousin, whispered a congratulatory remark to Olivia, who giggled quietly. Emily moved the pointer to Dad. $1,900,000, she said, and Dad nodded, clearly pleased, tapping a finger on the polished table surface. Mom received her turn next, $950,000, prompting a warm murmur of appreciation from the table. Ethan's bar registered $475,000, Olivia's $480,000. Each number accompanied by subtle expressions of pride, quiet celebrations of accomplishment, small toasts murmured under breath. Emily's voice carried authority as she explained in professional terms, "These figures reflect diligence, market penetration, and personal contribution metrics. Each ranking is verified against verified performance indicators and external benchmarks." She paused, making eye contact around the room, ensuring the family absorbed every detail. Dad's eyes flicked toward me briefly, a hint of condescension in his glance. "Mark should be taking notes," he remarked, his tone suggestive of expectation. I kept quiet, picking at my food, aware that my position at the table was marginal, my uniform stark against the polished suits and blazers. Emily returned to the screen for the final reveal. A small, red-marked column appeared at the far right of the chart, a stark contrast to the other bars. $40,000. My contribution. No bonuses, no assets, no accolades. The room fell into an awkward silence. Conversations paused mid-word, eyes darted toward me briefly before retreating. My hands rested calmly on my lap. I ate slowly, deliberately, ignoring the sudden tension, maintaining composure as the family processed the disparity. "Mark's figure reflects operational support and logistical coordination only," Emily added quickly, her voice professional but tinged with discomfort, aware of the contrast. A faint cough from Mom, a shuffle from Uncle Frank, and a nervous glance exchanged between Ethan and Olivia punctuated the air. No one spoke, but the message was clear: my contribution paled compared to the measured accomplishments of everyone else. I focused on the food, the cool silverware in my hands, deliberately detached from the murmurs and muted admiration around the table. Emily glanced at Dad, her expression signaling that she had concluded her demonstration. The room slowly exhaled, a collective realization of hierarchy and contribution settling in, and the formal tension lingered for a moment longer before conversations tentatively resumed. Throughout, I remained a quiet observer. The disparity was evident, the exclusion palpable. The wealth assessment, the precise sums, the professional terminology, all meticulously documented, all visibly emphasizing my minimal standing within the family structure. I did not interrupt, did not voice resentment, merely continued with my meal, aware that my role had been clearly defined and displayed in stark numerical terms. The finality of Emily's presentation left no room for debate. The chart was complete, the contributions assigned, and my position marked unmistakably. The room absorbed the information, and I maintained a quiet, steady presence, a silent contrast to the measured pride and satisfaction of everyone else. Emily flipped to the next slide, her laser pointer tracing the projected timeline with precise, deliberate movements. The title read Contributor Track Implementation Timeline, and beneath it, she had laid out meeting schedules for the next quarter, alternating weeks at NextWave's HQ, alternating weeks at selected family residences. She explained that only members who met certain contribution thresholds would be invited to these sessions. "Time is money," she said sharply. "Strategic minds only. Meetings will cover investment pooling, joint ventures, and profit sharing. Those who aren't contributing in meaningful ways will be excluded to maximize efficiency." Uncle Frank raised a brow. "So you're essentially cutting some of us out?" Emily smiled, unyielding. "Not cutting, reallocating. Everyone participates according to their measurable impact. Those who provide the resources and ideas necessary for growth will have a voice. Those who don't, well, their involvement is optional." Mom tilted her head, frowning. "And how do you define who qualifies?" She pointed to a bar chart showing the financial and intellectual contributions of each family member. "By capital contributions, by participation in prior ventures, and by the insights you bring to our strategic initiatives. It's quantifiable, transparent, fair." Ethan muttered something about fairness, but Emily waved it off, continuing. "Next week, I'll host at NextWave's HQ. Only contributors will attend. We will discuss joint ventures and upcoming projects. We will pool investment capital where it makes sense. Everyone else may observe, but will not participate in decision-making." I sat silently at the edge of the table, noting the precision in her words. There was no malice, only meticulous calculation and confidence. I understood her position. Emily switched slides again, her tone shifting slightly, infused with pride. The screen displayed NextWave's recent achievements: $42 million raised in Series B funding, pilot projects executed at several Fortune 500 companies, a burn rate of $3 million, and projected growth of 380%. She highlighted each metric briefly but firmly, letting the numbers speak. This is what happens when you combine vision, diligence, and measurable contribution, she concluded. Dad leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, nodding at the slide. I see why you insist on contributor-only governance. It's clear that measurable impact drives results. Mark, quiet until now, acknowledged the logic with a subtle nod, his internal reflection brief. He understood her reasoning, even if it placed him outside the contributor circle for now. He did not argue or interrupt. Emily paused for a moment, scanning the room. The reactions were mixed. Uncle Frank's frown remained, a silent questioning of the approach. Mom looked concerned but intrigued, clearly torn between supporting her daughter and acknowledging the efficiency in Emily's plan. Ethan and Olivia whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing toward the charts. The air was taut with a mixture of respect, admiration, and unease. The final part of the presentation drew attention back to the individual contributions. Emily highlighted the top contributors again, marking each with gold bars beside their names. Then, at the bottom of the chart, a small red bar appeared for Mark, $40,000, without any additional assets or bonus allocations. The room fell into awkward silence. I continued eating, keeping my composure, aware that the symbolic exclusion was not an insult, just an accurate representation of my position in her contributor-based hierarchy. Emily concluded her segment smoothly, collecting her laser pointer. Implementation begins immediately. Contributor-only governance ensures the efficiency and focus required to advance our ventures. Everyone will know where they stand, and strategic discussions will remain productive. No one spoke for a moment, the room still heavy with the contrast between her precision and my quiet presence. I watched as the family digested the information, noting reactions ranging from pride to discomfort. For me, the numbers were irrelevant, the dynamics and the clarity of her plan were what mattered. I stayed calm, knowing my understanding of the situation would serve its own purpose later. By the end of the presentation, Emily had firmly established the structure she wanted. The contributor-only meetings, the clear distinction between roles, and the emphasis on quantifiable impact left little room for debate. The family had witnessed her control and determination. I remained on the sidelines, observing, absorbing, and quietly accepting my place in this new order. At precisely 11:52 p.m., I finalized the emails I had been preparing for the past hour. My fingers hovered briefly over the keyboard before sending the termination instructions. Michael Chen at Chen & Associates, Patricia at Meridian Capital Management, and the relevant legal channels all received the directive simultaneously. The subject line read, Immediate termination of agreement NX 2024A. The content outlined every step with meticulous precision. Discontinue all capital transfers to NextWave, execute the 48-hour wind-down protocol as previously established, withdraw the full committed capital of $42 million, and confirm execution by end of day tomorrow. Each instruction referenced the contractual clauses we had agreed upon 18 months ago, specifically Section 15.3, detailing the dissolution process and predetermined termination triggers. Once sent, the messages displayed as delivered on my screen. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the quiet tension of the night settle in. The office was dim, illuminated only by the faint glow of my monitor and the soft hum of the air conditioner. Outside, Denver was asleep, streets empty, the city lights reflecting off the building windows like distant stars. I poured myself a glass of water, noticing the slight condensation dripping down the sides, and set it carefully beside a stack of quarterly reports from my other investments. Each page held projections, growth charts, and profit analyses, a calm contrast to the storm I had just set in motion. I reviewed the numbers again, confirming that every instruction adhered to the original agreement structure. The legal documentation I had prepared ensured that there would be no disputes, no loopholes for misinterpretation, and no potential interruptions in the process. The $42 million committed capital, the 48-hour wind down, the termination triggers, all of it aligned perfectly. Michael's and Patricia's confirmations were expected to be straightforward. The contracts had been designed to make the execution indisputable. I felt a cold clarity settle over me, a sense of quiet control contrasting sharply with the warm, celebratory atmosphere from earlier at the family gathering. The anticipation of tomorrow loomed, yet I remained composed. My role, invisible to the rest of the family, carried the weight of complete authority over NextWave's financial disengagement. Unlike the others, I had no illusions, no need for recognition or approval. While the family discussed projected outcomes and quarterly profits at the dinner table, I orchestrated the entire dissolution from behind the scenes, ensuring each move was legal, precise, and irreversible. By midnight, I had finished reviewing the final financial statements, confirming that the withdrawal schedule aligned perfectly with the instructions I had sent. Every dollar, every cent of the $42 million was accounted for in the corporate ledger. I set the reports aside and allowed myself a moment to breathe, acknowledging the gravity of the next morning's events. The quiet intensity of the night reflected the strategic coldness required to execute such a plan flawlessly. Tomorrow, the consequences would unfold, but tonight remained a space of calculated preparation and silent authority. I finally shut the laptop, leaving the sent messages visible in my outbox, a record of every instruction delivered exactly as intended. The room returned to near darkness, and I walked to the window, glancing out over the empty streets of Denver. In the distance, the faint orange glow of streetlights contrasted with the darkness surrounding them. The city slept, unaware of the controlled chaos about to cascade through NextWave's accounts at market open. I returned to my chair, sipped the water slowly, and let the anticipation settle, knowing the execution of the plan was complete. Tomorrow would be decisive, and I would remain the hidden force behind every legal and financial maneuver. At exactly 7:30 a.m., my phone buzzed. Emily's name flashed on the screen. I let it roll to voicemail, assuming it was just an early check-in. The second call came at 7:47, then 8:15. By 9:45, I had 14 missed calls and 23 increasingly frantic text messages. The first voicemail was calm but tinged with concern. "Hey, something strange is happening with our investors. They say there's a problem with our funding agreement. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, but please call me back when you can." 20 minutes later, a second voicemail revealed rising panic. "I really need you to call me immediately. The lawyers are saying the primary investor triggered some termination clause. This doesn't make sense. We had contracts guaranteeing funding for 18 months. By the third voicemail, Emily's voice was raw and frantic. "Please call right now. Something terrible is happening. The bank froze all our accounts. They say the investor withdrew authorization for transfers. Payroll is today, and I don't understand any of this." The texts mirrored the escalation. Early messages were professional, urgent business matter, call me. By mid-morning, they were desperate. "I think someone is deliberately trying to destroy NextWave. This is an emergency. I can't answer staff questions. Please, I need family right now." At 10:20 a.m., Mom called. Her voice trembled. Emily had phoned her, crying hysterically. Something devastating happened overnight with the company. The investors pulled out completely. "Do you know anything about business law? Maybe you could help her figure out what went wrong." I admitted I didn't. Emily had worked tirelessly on NextWave, and I couldn't understand how investors could vanish without explanation. At 11:35 a.m., Emily called again. This time I answered. Her voice was raw from crying. "Oh, thank God you picked up. Something horrible happened. Someone destroyed my company overnight." I asked calmly, "What do you mean destroyed?" "The investor, the one who gave us $42 million, terminated everything. No explanation, no warning, no negotiation. The lawyers say a clause in our contracts allowed them to withdraw funding with only 48 hours notice." "That seems unusual," I observed. "That's exactly what I said. We had thorough due diligence, legal protections, guaranteed funding. How can $42 million just disappear?" Her breath hitched. "What did the lawyers say about the termination clause?" "They said our primary investor, Meridian Capital, exercised a unilateral termination. But I never signed anything with them. I thought Pinnacle Venture Capital was our backer. Pinnacle says they've never heard of NextWave. No records, no documents. Nothing." I suggested maybe Meridian was a subsidiary. She paused, papers rustling. "I think someone impersonated legitimate investors. Fake companies, fake contracts, fake money. Then they pulled it away to watch me collapse. Why would anyone do that? I don't know. Industrial espionage, personal vendetta, or just cruel amusement. The lawyers suspect fraud, but Meridian's ownership is untraceable." At 1:45 p.m., Uncle Frank called. Emily had explained the disaster, asking about lawyers for investment fraud. I admitted I had no solution. The situation was highly suspicious. No legitimate venture capital firm would vanish $42 million without legal procedures. By 2:30 p.m., Michael, our attorney, confirmed the termination was complete. Everything executed precisely as instructed. NextWave's accounts were frozen. All funding agreements voided. Emily received proper legal notifications. Contracts drafted 18 months ago were airtight, including the 48-hour termination clause requiring no cause. Meridian Holdings dissolved according to plan, with corporate records sealed for 7 years. No connections to my other investments or personal assets. That evening around 6 p.m., Emily called once more. Her voice was hesitant. I need to ask something personal. Last night at dinner, you seemed unusually calm. Most people would be angry or embarrassed. I wasn't angry, I said. I considered your decision carefully. You acted based on what you believed was best for everyone. She paused, slow breathing audible. Could this be karma? The universe punishing me? I don't believe in cosmic justice, I replied. If this is karmic, I'm truly sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I was proud of my achievements and wanted respect. I excluded you from meetings to appear more professional. You don't need to apologize. Focus on rebuilding your life, I said. She cried again. Someone manipulated me. Fake funding, fake importance. Now I have to face everyone next week, explain there's no company, no 42 million, I'm not the entrepreneur I pretended to be. I'll be there, I said immediately. The family meeting was scheduled for Tuesday. NextWave's office lease had been terminated the same morning. Accounts froze. We met at our parents' living room instead. Emily sat curled on the sofa, faded jeans, oversized sweater, looking exhausted. I took the seat beside her. I have very difficult news, she began softly. NextWave no longer exists. The room murmured in confusion. She raised a hand for silence. Yesterday, investors withdrew all funding without warning. 42 million disappeared overnight. Uncle Frank frowned. How is that legally possible? There were clauses I didn't understand. The investor could terminate with 48 hours notice, Emily explained. Dad looked stunned. How could you sign a 42 million contract without understanding termination provisions? Emily's eyes welled. I'm not as smart about business as I pretended. I signed papers I didn't comprehend to seem successful. Pinnacle Venture Capital said they never heard of NextWave. Meridian Holdings, our supposed investor, cannot be traced. Someone created a fake investment scheme to deceive me. Robert asked, who would do this? I have no idea, she admitted. Maybe someone who knew I was lying, a competitor, or someone who thought it was entertaining. She looked at each of us. I was never qualified to run a tech company. I lied about education, work experience, and understanding of business concepts. I excluded my brother because I feared he'd ask questions I couldn't answer. The family offered support and encouragement, suggested job opportunities, and Mom insisted she move home temporarily. Emily then hugged me tightly. A text from Patricia at Meridian Capital Management arrived. NextWave termination executed successfully. 42 million returned. Shall I review new tech opportunities? I replied, not yet. Lessons like this require patience, precision, and perfect timing. Around 2:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with a call from Michael Chen. His tone was professional, almost clinical. Termination instructions executed. Corporate accounts frozen. All funding agreements are terminated. Miss Emily Carter has received formal legal notice. I nodded quietly, even though he couldn't see me. Every word reinforced the reality I had already orchestrated. The contracts I had signed off on were airtight, including the 48-hour termination clause I had insisted on. Anchor Holdings documentation had been sealed under Nevada statutes. There was no room for error. Emily's voice filtered through the phone lines later, a mixture of disbelief and panic. How could this happen? The accounts, payroll, our investors, her words trailed off, swallowed by the weight of her own realization. Every syllable confirmed that the structure I had set in motion was functioning precisely as intended. I glanced at the stacks of quarterly reports I had been reviewing earlier, the numbers now a silent witness to the collapse. Each figure, each projection, had been part of a meticulously calculated plan. I felt a strange mixture of detachment and the faintest tinge of regret. It wasn't personal. It was methodical. The silence after the call was almost deafening. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. I made a note of the sealed documents in my ledger, no leaks, no exceptions. Emily's panic was now officially documented, corroborated by legal confirmation. The next wave structure, the empire she had spent years building, was effectively immobilized. I leaned back, letting the gravity of the legal finality sink in. Every action I had taken had followed protocol. Every clause had been respected. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface, the personal cost lingered, not mine, not yet, but inevitably hers. The 48-hour window was counting down. The legal precision of my moves left no ambiguity. By tomorrow, every transaction, every planned disbursement, would have been nullified. There would be no turning back, no second chance. Next wave's reality had been rewritten, and the stark silence in my office was a testament to the magnitude of that truth. The living room felt smaller that afternoon, as if the walls had moved inward to contain what none of us could quite face. The lease on her downtown office had been terminated that morning, and her car sat in the driveway, its back seat filled with boxes of files, tangled cords, and a framed certificate that no longer meant anything. She looked unlike herself, worn out, her hair tied back, her jacket replaced by an oversized sweater. I sat beside her on the couch, watching the reflection of the pale winter light fade from the window. She started without preamble. The words came as if she had rehearsed them all night. The investors had withdrawn $42 million overnight. The accounts were locked. The legal team at Pinnacle claimed they had never met her. The firm she mentioned so often, Meridian Capital, was now unreachable. Anchor Holdings, the name she spoke with such confidence, appeared to have no traceable registry. She spoke in short, even sentences, as if each one had to be pushed through the air before she could breathe again. Mom sat in the armchair opposite, a folded handkerchief in her lap. Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees, searching for a question that would not sound like accusation. Frank stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, the way he did when a meeting was about to end badly. For a long moment, no one said anything. "I need to tell you everything," she said finally. "They think some of the documentation might have been fabricated. The lawyers are using words like possible fraud. I don't know what's real anymore. I thought I could control it." Her voice trembled only once. "And there's more." She looked at me, then down at her hands. "I didn't go to MIT. I never did. I studied communications at a state college. The job at Google, it wasn't in development or management. I worked in a cafeteria. I wanted to change that part of the story, and then it just kept growing." She paused. "The investors wanted the image, the confidence, the numbers. I gave them all of it. And now it's all gone." Mom covered her mouth. Frank's eyes softened for the first time in years. Dad straightened, his expression unreadable, the silence between us too heavy to move. I felt something unfamiliar, not anger, not relief, but a strange, muted understanding. Everything she had built on ambition and precision had collapsed in less than a day. "I thought if I could show you success," she said quietly, "then maybe I would finally be worth the attention you all gave to everyone else." Her hand shook slightly. "I was so afraid of being ordinary." No one interrupted. The air in the room felt thick with what had been said and what still waited beneath it. Then Mom stood and went to her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're still part of this family," she said, her voice low. "That's what matters now." Frank mentioned a friend who could help her find a position at a local firm, just something to start with. Dad offered to call his accountant, to review what could be salvaged. There were quiet murmurs of agreement, the slow reconstruction of something fragile. She nodded, barely meeting anyone's eyes. "I've already cancelled the contributor-only rule," she said. "No more of that. Family meetings are for family." The words came out simple, final, and tired. It was the first time her tone held no trace of performance, no need to prove or defend. I sat still, listening to the faint hum of the heater, the sound of the clock in the hallway. She turned slightly toward me. "Stay for a bit," she said, almost in a whisper. "I don't want to be alone right now." I nodded. We sat there without speaking, the distance that had been years wide between us shrinking to something bearable. The house smelled of coffee and dust, of old photographs and decisions made long ago. She leaned back, her breathing steadying, and for a brief moment, there was peace, not triumph, not forgiveness, just the quiet acknowledgement that the performance had ended and what was left was real. Later, When the others drifted into the kitchen, she looked at me again. "I didn't do it out of malice," she said. "I just wanted to be seen as capable, as someone who belonged." I understood. The pride that had once made her untouchable had also been the thing that destroyed her. The evening light shifted across the floor as she reached for the folded papers beside her, the termination notice, the formal letters, the remnants of what had been Next Wave. She didn't cry. She only traced the edge of the top page with her finger, as though by touching it she could accept that it no longer held power over her. When Mom returned with tea, she took a cup and smiled faintly. "I'll figure something out," she said. "Not yet, but I will." It was the first sentence that sounded like her own. For once, she didn't sound like she was pitching a future, she was simply standing in the present. By the time the lights dimmed and the house quieted, I realized that the rule had changed not just for her, but for all of us. The hierarchy she built from numbers and titles had dissolved, replaced by something quieter and harder to measure. Family meetings were, once again, for family. Driving home, I watched the late afternoon sun flatten against the horizon, coloring the streets in a soft amber tone. The silence inside the car felt heavier than usual, but not unbearable. Emily's voice still echoed faintly in my mind, not the sharp tone of confrontation, but the subdued, tired one from the living room. She had finally stopped pretending. For the first time in months, maybe years, there was no distance between any of us. Just exhaustion, and something close to honesty. I knew she would recover, though it might take time. The lease on her office was gone, the glass walls and neon logo dismantled within days, and yet the collapse seemed to release her more than destroy her. The burden of keeping the illusion alive had been heavier than anyone realized. What remained now was a strange kind of peace, fragile but real. She would need to rebuild herself from the inside out. And the family, despite everything, would stand by her. There was no debate about that. I would keep working at the warehouse. The rhythm of routine, early shifts, the sound of pallets sliding on the concrete, the quiet nods between coworkers, had become its own kind of refuge. Parallel to that, the structure I had built years ago still functioned perfectly. The accounts, the legal layers, the registered shells, all separate, all invisible. No one would ever connect them to me. That, at least, was intentional. Discretion was not only protection, it was control. My phone vibrated on the seat beside me. A new message lit up the screen. "Patricia. Tech Flow, Next Wave, termination executed successfully, $42 million returned to your primary investment fund. Begin reviewing new startups?" I read it twice, not because I didn't understand it, but because of the weight it carried. The number represented an entire story compressed into digits, ambition, deceit, lessons that cost more than most could afford. I typed slowly before sending back a single reply. "Not yet. Let's wait a few months." The phone dimmed again, and the car returned to silence. I turned onto the familiar road leading home. The maples on the side were already losing color, their leaves gathering in uneven piles by the curb. I remembered Emily sitting in that same house years ago, confident and dazzling, outlining plans none of us questioned. Back then, I had mistaken her certainty for truth. Now I understood that confidence is often built from fear, and ambition from the ache of wanting to be seen. Mom would probably have dinner waiting, even if no one was really hungry. Dad would ask how the drive went, pretending not to know more than he did. Family has its own language of denial, but also of forgiveness. Tonight, there would be fewer words and more quiet gestures, the kind that repair what speeches can't. Emily had said something before I left the house. She had looked at me with that hesitant, fragile calm and whispered, "Don't give up on me yet." I told her I wouldn't. And I meant it. The collapse of Next Wave didn't erase her entirely. It stripped away the performance, revealing the person underneath, scared, imperfect, but real. Maybe that was the point all along. As I parked in front of the house, I thought about Patricia's message again. The system we had built still worked flawlessly, detached and clinical. Money moved as instructed, clauses triggered, accounts locked. Efficiency without empathy. And yet, tonight, empathy seemed the only thing that mattered. Numbers couldn't measure the cost of rebuilding trust or the relief of honesty. Those things existed outside balance sheets. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the fading sky. The air smelled faintly of rain. Through the window, I could see the lights of the living room, the same space that had witnessed breakdowns, apologies, and the small, necessary decision to keep being a family. Emily was there, sitting quietly, not speaking, but present. That was enough. Some lessons demand payment in millions, others ask for humility. Both are expensive in their own ways. What mattered now wasn't the loss, or even the recovery, but the understanding that came with it. Patience. Precision. Timing. Family isn't an investment to manage, it's the one thing that tests whether you truly understand value. And finally, I think I did.